What percentage of the money supply do you think is in excess right now in the United States?
Well, look, I told you this because I wrote this in my annual letter, but it's stunning that, the reason the stock market went up, dollar for dollar, was actually tied to the growth in the M2 money supply. The correlation was 0.92. So for every dollar that the Fed printed, the stock market went up by 92 cents. So, it stands to reason that if the Fed is going to take $3 to $5 trillion of value out, then we have to re-rate the equity markets by $3 to $5 trillion at a minimum. And then you have to re-rate and re-baseline for earnings. And so that's probably another 20 or 30%. Look, here's the thing. I think we have to also be sensitive to the fact that the Fed operates on a certain class of data. And that data in the 21st century is pretty pathetic. Nick, you can probably find this, but there was an article, I think it was in the New York Times, that really walked through how CPI is calculated. And it's a bunch of people that work for the government that walk around with iPads, building relationships with local businesses in all these random places all around the country and asking them to, chit chat for 15 minutes and do these surveys. Now, you would have thought that in 2023 or 2022, what the government would have said to, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, all the payment rails, the banks and Stripe is, send me a feed in the following structured way so that I can actually have an absolute precise sense of inflation, because inflation really only occurs when a good or a service trades hands for money, right? And you calculate what did that thing trade at the day before and what does it trade for today? So you could get an absolute precise sense of it. Instead, we do this random sampling thing and
subjective,
it's bad.
Humans, etc.
So if you read this article, your takeaway will be, oh my God, this is very rickety and it drives an enormous hammer that we use to try to manage the economy. That's the first thing. I think you need to buckle your seatbelt because the next 3, 4, 5 months of CPI will probably be very, very bad. 7, 8, 9%. Why? There are a handful of components that have gotten completely run away. Number one, the biggest one is rent. And so rent works on a 3-month lag. We're going to reintroduce what the true owner's equivalent rent is into CPI. So we can already forecast that CPI going up. Oil is at $105 a barrel. Russia is basically trying to break the back of Europe by now messing with their nat gas supplies. The German energy minister yesterday said that if that happens, it could be a contagion equivalent to Lehman Brothers with respect to energy. When you play all of these things out, what you have is unfortunately rampant runaway costs that really have no mechanism to get back in check in the absence of some real governmental changes. Our policy on this Ukraine-Russia war, how we intend to sort of work or cooperate or fight with China, all of these things have to get solved. So in the absence of that, prices are going to continue to go up. And so what does the Fed do? How does it throw away what little credibility it has left when there's 8 and 9% inflation prints and saying, we think we're done for right now? You can't do that. So they will overcorrect because there's just going to be so much pressure for them to act. When you look at who the incremental buyer is in the stock market, it tends to give you a sense of whether prices can go up or will continue to go down. And the poorest informed buyer tends to be retail. And the most informed buyer tends to be these very large institutional hedge funds, right? So there's a spectrum. And Facebook is an example of of big tech that is poorly owned by retail. So it's mostly owned by smart money. And the case that smart money makes for owning Facebook is that it's got an extremely cheap price to earnings ratio. So you must own it. And what they said was that they, looking at the tea leaves of consumer demand, what they actually re-underwrote was that actually it's not that the price to earnings was cheap, it's that the E in PE was just wrong. And if they pass through all of these increases in inflation and their earnings expectations into Facebook, it's actually more like fair value at a lower price. That's why they sold it so much on a day where the market was up. Now, why is that important? Well, eventually you're going to touch all these other stocks as well that are going to go through earnings revisions in this recession. This is where I think Wall Street has done a very poor job on behalf of retail. If you look at the average estimates of earnings you will be shocked to hear that Wall Street actually has this year being record earnings, next year earnings continuing to go up. How is that even possible?
Well,
how is that? If you're sitting here, how do you see earnings continuing to go up into these prints like this when you cannot pass through, 80, 90% increases in energy and COGS and whatnot? How does that happen?
I think the what people would say is maybe they're going to lower their costs. And so with layoffs and lowering salaries and lowering spend on advertising, the E could go up if people start belt tightening, and then we start having companies that are being run, just more
you'll have
for
to
the
sell
bottom
fewer.
line.
You'll have to sell fewer things because there'll be fewer people with jobs to buy things.
But we have 10 million job openings. So this is the weird thing about this recession is because we haven't let a lot of people immigrate into the country.
But is that what you think the consensus view on Wall Street is? That basically a bunch of people get fired, and so that's why earnings continue to go up?
Well, they stop hiring for 2 years in advance, right? Facebook said they were hiring for like 2024. Their hiring plans were looking out 2 years. So now if they go on a hiring freeze, maybe there's, and that's their number one cost. I'm just putting out a theory.
I'll give you the counterfactual. I think Wall Street's wrong.
Okay.
And I think that earnings are going to go down this year and will definitely go down in 23. And so I think what probably happens is the entire world of equities needs to get repriced at a lower price. And in that, it's going to put enormous pressure on these cash-burning, non-profitable tech companies.
Well, that's for sure. But in the ones that are profitable, Chamath, they're aware of this. Facebook just canceled like 2 of their prototypes they were working on to save money. So that whole $10 billion into VR, I think they're trying to make that number look smaller. Freeberg, if the prices of just daily living, of which transportation and housing and healthcare are now the top 3, I believe, if those things go up, would that make people want to go back to work to pay for those things? Or does it create capitulation where people say, I'm moving in with my cousin, I'm going to lower my balance sheet? What is your prediction there?
I've mentioned this in the past, but I think there's another kind of interesting outcome of this. We've had several months in a row of pretty significant increase in consumer credit. And I think the reason is things are getting more expensive. People generally do not like to reduce their spend on stuff or their lifestyle. Once you get used to a lifestyle like going out to dinner once a week or going to the movies every week, and you create a budget, you create a life experience around that, a model around that, it's very hard to say, okay, I got to cut budget now and I got to reduce my life. I would rather say I'm going to keep doing that, or at least there's some inertia or some momentum to keep spending on the things that you've been spending on. And the way you do that in a model where you don't have as much income or you have less income and things are getting more expensive is you take on more debt. And so there is a little bit of a nervousness that I have had that people's response, generally the consumer response to inflation and to a kind of a shifting income environment like this is not necessarily to cut as quickly, but take on more debt and keep buying.